It started on a normal day, during a shift that should have felt like every other one I'd worked in that hospital. I was 28 at the time, still new enough to be careful about everything, but experienced enough that nothing really surprised me anymore. I remember walking in with my coffee, badge clipped on, shoes still squeaking a little from the rain outside. I wasn't stressed, tired, or distracted. It was just another evening on a quiet medical floor, the kind of shift where you expect the hours to crawl more than anything else. The unit smelled like disinfectant and warm plastic, the usual mix. Half the staff were already charting, and the other half were finishing up handoff reports. I said hi to a couple of nurses I knew, checked the whiteboard, and headed to my assigned rooms. Everything felt completely routine: checks, vitals, meds, the same conversations I'd had 100 times. Nothing out of place. Nothing strange. Just the normal low-level noise of hospital life humming in the background. I remember thinking it was going to be one of those slow nights. The kind where you catch up on documentation early and maybe get a chance to breathe. I didn't feel nervous. The halls were well lit. The patients were stable. The entire wing felt calm and predictable. Exactly the kind of shift that never makes the news, never gets retold, never creates any stories worth sharing. But even on normal days, you notice things. Little things that your brain tries to shrug off. A door half open when you know you closed it. A movement at the end of a hallway that disappears when you look again. A quiet sound coming from a room that shouldn't have anyone in it yet. Small things. So small that you convince yourself they're nothing. That's how it started. I was doing my usual walkthrough before settling at the desk when I noticed one of the rooms at the far end, room 412, had its door cracked open. It wasn't assigned yet. No patient. No staff inside. Just a dark room with a curtain drawn. At first, it didn't bother me. People forget to shut doors all the time. But when I walked past it, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I didn't see anything. I didn't hear anything. I just felt it, like someone was standing in that dark space, just a few feet behind the curtain, listening to my footsteps. I paused and looked back. The door was still cracked. No movement. No sound. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was tired, that the room was empty. Then, as I turned to leave, I heard something light fall over inside, soft enough that I almost doubted it, but loud enough to stop me in my tracks. A tiny clatter from a room that was supposed to have no one in it. That was the moment I first felt something was wrong. I didn't know it yet, but that small sound was the start of the worst night I've ever had in that hospital. The hospital I worked in wasn't a big city place. It sat on the edge of a mid-sized town in northern Illinois, right where the neighborhoods fade into long stretches of quiet roads and empty fields. The building itself was old in some parts and newly renovated in others, so depending on the wing, you could go from bright polished hallways to dim yellow ones that still smelled like the 90s. My shift that night started at 6 p.m., just as the daylight was fading outside, and the parking lot lights were flickering on. The medical floor I was assigned to was one of the quieter wings. Most of the serious emergencies stayed downstairs in the ER, and most of the chaos stayed up in ICU. Our floor was usually a mix of post-op patients, chronic illness cases, and people recovering from infections. Nothing dramatic. Nothing fast-moving. Just slow, steady work. I liked it there. I liked the predictable pace and the familiar faces. The unit had 22 rooms, though only about 14 were occupied that night. There were 2 nurses besides me, Aaron, who'd been there for over a decade and didn't get shaken by anything, and Marcus, who was still in his second year but handled himself well. We also had 1 tech on duty, a quiet guy named Luis who mostly kept to himself but was reliable. It wasn't a full staff, but it wasn't short either, not enough to feel overwhelmed. Outside the windows, the sky was already a deep blue, with that early fall chill. Inside, the halls were half-lit because the far end of the wing was still under maintenance. Construction equipment sat behind plastic sheets, and the last few rooms hadn't been reopened yet. That part of the hallway always felt a little colder and quieter because the airflow never reached it the same way. Most nights, I barely noticed it. I was on the schedule to cover the full wing because we didn't expect many admissions. A couple of patients were stable, one was sleeping off sedation, and another was waiting for test results. I had already done my rounds, checked vitals, updated charts, and made sure everyone had what they needed. It should have been an easy shift, slower than usual even. By 7 p.m., the unit had settled into that calm, predictable rhythm. Machines hummed softly. Telemetry monitors beeped in steady patterns. Nurses talked in low voices. The kind of atmosphere that makes you feel like nothing bad could possibly happen. The kind of quiet that convinces you the night will stay uneventful. I had no special responsibilities beyond the usual.
No emergencies pending.
No difficult patients. No reason to expect anything out of the ordinary. I was simply there to do my job, keep an eye on my patients, and make it through another shift. At the time, none of us, me, Aaron, Marcus, or Luis, had any idea what was hiding in the unassigned rooms at the far end of the hall. We didn't know that one of those empty rooms wasn't actually empty.
Not yet.
The first small thing I noticed didn't even feel like a warning at the time. After I finished my initial rounds, I did a quick walk down the hall to double-check supply levels and make sure all the room doors were closed the way they should be. Most were. But room 412, the room that wasn't supposed to be occupied yet, was cracked open again. Only a couple inches. I remembered shutting it when I came in earlier. I always close empty rooms. It's habit. Less light, less noise, fewer reasons for visitors to wander in by mistake. So seeing it open again made me pause for a second. Not nervous, just confused. I figured maybe one of the newer nurses went in to grab something and forgot to pull the door shut. That happened a lot. I pushed it closed, didn't think much about it, and kept moving. The next sign came maybe 20 minutes later. I was charting at the desk and heard a soft knock from somewhere down the hall. It wasn't loud, more like something lightly tapping wood. I looked up, expecting to see one of my patients calling out or maybe someone dropping something. But the hallway was empty. Quiet. I ignored it. Hospitals make a lot of strange small noises, vents, carts, beds settling, doors shifting from airflow. You eventually learn not to jump at every sound. But then the knock happened again. Same rhythm. Same soft, light tap. I turned my head toward the far end of the hall where the new patient was supposed to be admitted later. Room 412. I got up and walked a little closer, just enough to get a better look. The door was cracked open again. Same angle as before. Same slow, careful opening that didn't match the airflow or the usual door drift these rooms sometimes had. This time, when I approached, I felt something different. Not fear, just a kind of alertness. Like my body responded before my mind did. The lights above that section of hallway were steady, no flickering, no dimming, but I still felt like the air there was heavier somehow. Harder to ignore. I stepped up to the door and pushed it shut again, this time making sure the latch clicked. I even tugged it lightly to make sure it stayed closed.
It did.
So I went back to the desk. When I sat down, I realized I kept glancing toward that end of the hallway without meaning to, as if something was waiting for me to look again. About 10 minutes later, I went to check on one of my patients. As I walked back toward the desk, I passed room 412. The door was still closed, which made me feel a little silly for being on edge. But then, as I got about halfway down the hall, I heard breathing. Not heavy breathing, just a slow, steady inhale and exhale. Close enough that it sounded like it was coming from right behind a door or right behind a curtain. I stood still for a moment listening. The sound didn't come again. I told myself it was one of my patients or some echo from a different room. But I didn't believe that fully. It was the first time that night I felt something wasn't right. The next part of the night is when things stopped feeling like simple coincidences. I left the desk to check on my diabetic patient, and when I came back out into the hall, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. Room 412's light was on. I hadn't turned it on. No one had been assigned there yet. And the switch was on the inside wall, not near the door. Someone would have had to walk in a few steps to flip it. I glanced back toward the nurse station, half expecting someone to tell me they went in earlier. Nobody said anything. Everyone was busy with their own charts and calls. The new nurses were helping each other with a dressing change. Karen was on the phone with pharmacy. No one had been anywhere near that room. I walked toward the open door slowly. The light spilling out into the hall made the space look brighter than it had earlier, but not safer. More exposed, if anything. When I reached the doorframe, I leaned in just enough to see the inside. The curtain near the bed was half drawn again, like someone had brushed past it. "Hello," I said quietly. Not nervous yet, just cautious. No answer. I stepped in only far enough to flip the light back off. I didn't want to do a full sweep of the room.
There was no reason to.
No patient. No equipment missing. Everything looked exactly how it should have looked. Still, I left the door completely open this time. I figured if it was going to open by itself, it might as well stay open. But as I walked away, I felt the prickling sensation of being watched. The kind that doesn't feel like imagination, more like instinct. Like you're being studied from the corner of an eye you can't see. I forced myself to focus on work. I helped one patient to the bathroom, checked vitals, updated 2 charts. But every time I walked down that hall, my attention kept drifting to 412. The room felt like a pocket of stillness, as if the air didn't move the same way in there. It pulled my eyes without me choosing to look. About an hour later, things escalated. I was restocking gauze in the supply cart when I heard footsteps. Not casual footsteps, direct, steady, purposeful, coming from the far end of the hall. I looked up thinking it was one of the nurses. But no one was there. Only the long hallway. And room 412. Its door was now half closed again, even though I had left it fully open. A sudden coldness went through me. I walked toward the room, but stopped halfway and listened. The footsteps were gone. But I heard something else. A soft shift inside the room. Fabric moving. Slow. Intentional. I knew, with absolute certainty then, that someone was inside. And for the first time that night, I felt trapped. The wing was quiet, the other nurses occupied, and my station was too far behind me to call out without raising panic. I was standing in a hallway that suddenly felt too long, too empty, and way too quiet. Whatever was in room 412, it wasn't hiding by accident anymore. I stood outside room 412 for maybe 5 seconds, trying to convince myself to call security first. But the room was quiet again. Too quiet. And the door, half closed like someone had just slipped inside, kept pulling my focus. I finally pushed it open with my shoulder, not wanting to step directly in until I knew what I was walking into. The room looked empty at first glance. The bed was clean. The curtain hung still. The trash can was empty, the tray table untouched. But the feeling, something pressing against the back of my neck, didn't go away. I took one more step inside, keeping my hand near the door handle. That's when I heard it. A low rustle. Not loud, but close. Not the air vents. Not the sheets. Something heavier, like a foot-shifting weight. I leaned just far enough to peer around the curtain, and froze. A man was standing in the small gap between the curtain and the wall. He wasn't a patient. He wasn't staff. His clothes were dirty, dark hoodie, ripped jeans, mud on the knees. His shoulders were tense, and he was facing the window, like he'd been staring outside until he heard me. The worst part was that he didn't react at first. He didn't jump.
He didn't speak.
He just slowly turned his head toward me. His eyes were wide, red around the edges, unfocused but locked on mine like he hadn't seen another person in days. For a second, neither of us moved. Then he whispered, almost emotionless, "Don't call anyone." My heart dropped straight out of my chest. Every instinct I had told me to run, but I knew if I bolted without a plan, he'd grab me before I reached the hallway. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Sir, you can't be in here. I can help you, but we need to step outside first." He took a single step toward me. Slow, but controlled. He wasn't confused. He wasn't lost. He was deliberate. I backed into the hallway, keeping my eyes on him. He followed. When he stepped fully into the hall, the overhead lights hit him better. That's when I saw it. His hands were trembling, but not empty. He had something in his right sleeve. Something long, thin, and metal. Hidden but not well. I knew I couldn't outrun him if he lunged. The hall was too narrow, too empty. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I ran toward the supply closet near the nurse station. It had a heavy door, solid latch. If I made it there first, I had a chance. I sprinted. The sound of his footsteps hit immediately behind me, Quick, uneven, like he was half sprinting, half stumbling but gaining fast. I slammed into the closet, yanked the door shut, and locked it. His hand hit the outside a second later. He tried the handle. Then he shoved the door.
Hard.
The whole frame shook. I pressed my back against it, shaking, trying to keep the latch tight. "Open it," he said through the door, voice low and cracked. "I just need to talk." I didn't answer. I grabbed the wall phone inside and called security with one hand while holding the door with the other. His shoulder hit the door again, louder this time. Then again. And again. I didn't know if the lock would hold. I just kept saying into the phone, "He's outside the door.
Hurry.
Please hurry." And outside he kept pushing. And breathing. And whispering, "Don't call anyone." Security reached the hallway faster than I expected, but in that moment it still felt like forever. I heard the radios first, sharp static and clipped voices, then the pounding footsteps coming down the corridor. The man outside the closet stopped hitting the door, like he was listening. I froze, afraid he might run, or worse, try one last time to break in before help arrived. Instead, he stepped back. I heard the soft creak of his shoe on the tile as he shifted his weight. Then the hallway went silent. One of the security guards shouted, "Sir, step away from the door." Another repeated it. No movement. No response. A few seconds later, they pulled me out of the closet. I nearly collapsed from the adrenaline. The man was gone from the immediate doorway, but they spotted him halfway down the hallway, standing completely still, facing the wall like he was studying something on it. He didn't fight when they approached. He just let them grab his arms and pull whatever metal object he'd been hiding out of his sleeve, a long, sharpened piece of broken bed frame rail, filed down at the end. But the real shock didn't hit until after they searched him and tried to figure out who he was. He didn't have a wallet, no ID, no visitor band, no patient tags, nothing. At first, we all assumed he was some homeless person who slipped in through the ambulance bay. It happens sometimes, not often, but enough that security knows the signs. But as soon as they pulled up his sleeves to check for injuries, I saw something that made my stomach drop all over again.
He did have a hospital band.
But it wasn't ours. It was from a psychiatric facility 2 counties over. The date on it was 3 days old. The security supervisor radioed it in. Within minutes, we learned the truth. The man had been admitted to that psych facility earlier in the week after being found hiding in someone's barn. He had refused treatment, refused to speak to staff, refused to say his name. But on the second night, he disappeared. They assumed he slipped out a fire door during shift change. They'd been looking for him since. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the small detail one of the guards pointed out while bagging the sharpened metal rail. It wasn't broken from one of our beds. Our beds had white-painted rails. This one had chipped blue paint, the same blue used in the inpatient psych unit beds at the facility he escaped from. Meaning, he didn't just pick it up somewhere. He'd brought it with him. He'd been carrying it the entire time he'd been inside our hospital. And when the police arrived and searched the wing, they found signs he had been there much longer than any of us realized. Dusty footprints behind a linen cart, a water cup taken from an empty room, a pile of wrappers tucked behind an unused recliner. He hadn't wandered into room 412 by accident. He'd been hiding in that wing for hours, maybe longer, waiting. And for reasons no one understood, he chose me as the first person to approach. The police stayed for hours after they took the man away. They walked every inch of the East Wing, checking behind carts, inside cabinets, under beds, even in the ceiling panels. They said it was procedure, but I could tell from the way they kept exchanging looks that something about the whole situation bothered them as much as it bothered me. I tried to finish the rest of my shift, but I couldn't stop thinking about the details we'd pieced together. How the man had slipped out of a psych facility without anyone noticing, how he'd made it all the way to our hospital, how he'd known exactly where to hide. Hospitals aren't mazes, but they can become one when you're quiet enough and patient enough. And he clearly had been both. The hallway looked different after everything happened. Too long, too empty, too exposed. Every time I walked past room 412, I slowed down without meaning to. The door was propped open now, lights on, as if keeping it bright would somehow make the memory weaker.
It didn't.
I kept replaying the moment he stepped out from behind that curtain.
How still he was.
How deliberately he moved. How he kept whispering, "Don't call anyone," like he wasn't talking to me, but reminding himself. By morning, administration came in. They told us the official line. The situation was under control, the man was in custody, no one had been harmed, and we were safe to return to normal operations. They encouraged us to file incident reports, talk to counseling if needed, and focus on routine.
Routine.
Like that would erase the image of him standing just inches away from me with that sharpened metal rail hidden in his sleeve. But the part that stuck with me came from one of the officers after he finished searching the wing. He pulled me aside, his voice low so the others wouldn't hear. He said, "Just so you know, he didn't say a single word after we detained him." I nodded, thinking that wasn't surprising. But then he added, "Except one thing. When we asked why he came to this floor, he kept repeating the same sentence. He told me she'd be here." I asked if he meant a relative, or a friend, or someone he knew. The officer shook his head. He didn't give a name, just said and that you were the one in the hallway. Does that mean anything to you? It didn't. It still doesn't. I told him no, and he wrote something in his notebook, but I don't think he believed me. They transferred the man back to a secure psychiatric unit later that afternoon. For a few weeks, I checked the news and the police blotter, half expecting something more to come out about him, who he was, how he got out, or why he'd fixated on that wing. But nothing did. The story faded.
New shifts came.
New patients. Life moved on. Except for me. Because every so often, usually on the quieter nights, I still feel that same prickling sensation at the end of the hallway. The same pressure on the back of my neck. The same instinct that someone is standing just behind a door, listening for my footsteps. The hospital installed better locks on the side doors. Security increased patrols. They tell us it's safer now. But I still think about that officer's words. He told me she'd be here. And the part no one can explain. How the man knew my name.